Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to class today. Coming to you from my fortress of solitude here. Actually, I'm in my camper because a house full of 6 kids and 2 dogs is generally a little bit too noisy to do video recordings in. So I've retreated to my camper to do this video, and hopefully this will work out well. In any case, sorry I couldn't be with you today. Hopefully you got a chance to sleep in a little bit, and but still can make use of the content that we're going to be talking about with this method. So anyway. Today, we're going to talk about the philosophy of existentialism. Existentialism is kind of a unique philosophy. It's actually a group of philosophies, if you will. There are many people who have been called existentialist, and they believe a wide variety of things. In fact, we'll look at 2 individuals today. Soren Kierkegaard, who is often called the father of existentialism, and then Friedrich Nietzsche as well. And these 2 particular individuals probably on many levels would be very much drastically different from one another, right? But nonetheless, they all bear marks of sort of an existentialist philosophy. Now, before we dive into individual expressions or the way that people have individually discussed existentialism, I want to kind of do a review of some of the common features of various individual existentialist philosophies, what holds them together, I guess, as a group, things they have in common. Anyhow, existentialist philosophy, you can look at some of this on your book. Page 322, it goes down a series of bullet points and that talk about various things that hold existentialist philosophies in common. I want to mention them and just kind of explain them briefly, and then we'll move on to some of the particular philosophers here. So the first one that your book mentions, the first characteristic of an existentialist philosophy is that of individualism and subjectivity. Basically what this means is, or what this is referring to, is that existentialist philosophies find meaning in the subject rather than sort of an objective meaning. Now, this can go in areas of metaphysics. This can go in areas of epistemology, and certainly in axiology and in value theory and things like that. This applies almost across the board. But the idea here is that a person's subjective experience or individual experience is what is emphasized. This is almost a perfect sort of postmodern philosophy in some ways, in that it rejects the idea of an overarching story that where you derive meaning from things around you, from the world around you. Rather, you derive meaning, as we'll see in a little bit, from your own subjective experience, from your own subjective choice. Existentialism is centered on individuals and not on groups per se. So that's one thing. The next bullet point there is freedom and responsibility. Freedom and responsibility. Existentialist philosophies place a very keen emphasis on our responsibility to choose, our responsibility to make choices, to freely choose. In fact, we've talked a little bit when we were back in metaphysics and talking about some metaphysics. We've mentioned one philosopher named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or I'm sorry, Jean-Paul Sartre. Different Jean, right? So Jean-Paul Sartre, who is a 20th century philosopher, existentialist philosopher, probably one of the better known ones as well, who really articulates existentialism in relationship to our responsibility to sort of create ourselves through our choices. So that's Jean-Paul Sartre, and we'll see him in just shortly in a little bit. One of Sartre's, what he is well known for saying, or I guess his calling card or motto, if you will. One of the things that he's known for saying is existence precedes essence, and this is the idea that as a creature we exist in body, Okay, so we have a physical existence before we as a person have a meaning, and that's what he means by essence. So when he talks about essence, he talks about our meaning as an individual, whether we're whatever it is that we are. His idea is that we create ourselves through our choices, and so we have to exist physically before we can create an essence for who or what we are, before our life and before we take on meaning as an individual. So existence precedes essence. Existence as a physical individual precedes our creating ourselves, or the meaning of what it is to be me. I have to exist physically first before I can do that. Existence precedes essence. And by the way, what he means by that also is that I don't really have any meaning until I make it for myself, until I create myself through my choices. Now, this idea, existence precedes essence, finds its manifestations in other philosophers as well. Martin Heidegger, one of his things that he'll talk about is part of what it means to exist is the responsibility for us to project or to create ourselves. And part of the problem with our existence is this fallenness, or this tendency to allow others to define us. So we'll see that as we get to Heidegger. Let's see. So there's the relationship between existence and essence, anguish and absurdity. Now, understand that the existentialist believes, for the most part, that meaning is subjective, that they're, with the vast majority of them, they believe or will espouse the idea that our lives don't have any meaning inherent to themselves, that this universe is absurd, and the idea of meaning, or the universe conferring meaning onto anything, is absurd. So what does it mean to be alive? Well, nothing really. But you see, the problem is that none of us can live as if our life doesn't have meaning. None of us can live like that. Nobody can live consistently. I mean, the very fact that you got up and put on clothes and came out and well, maybe you're in your pajamas. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to know. Okay, but if the very fact that you ate your latest meal, the very fact that you got out of bed and you're listening to this video, means or signifies that you find meaning in something. Even if it's just a full stomach, even if it's just the luxury of watching things on the computer or TV or whatever, you find meaning in something, and whatever you find meaning in is what gives meaning to your life subjectively. Now, the next person might not find meaning in whatever it is that you're finding meaning in, but you find meaning in yourself. Now, here's the thing: none of us can live without meaning. If we truly believe that life has no meaning, if we were to practice that, we would all be suicidal. And the existentialist realizes that not everybody's suicidal, which that's a good thing, right? So people must have to find meaning in something. So while there is no objective meaning, meaning the universe does not confer on us a meaning from the outside, or God does not confer meaning on us from the outside, nevertheless, we have to find meaning for ourselves. Now, that's what the existentialist will ultimately say. Now, with the possible exception of Soren Kierkegaard, who is a Christian existentialist, who might say something along the lines of, we may not be absolutely sure of what our meaning is, but we can find meaning through a subjective leap of faith, and we'll see what he means in just a minute. But when we are faced with the apparent meaninglessness of the universe, we recognize that the universe is absurd. It's absolutely meaningless. It's absurd. There's no reason for us to be here, and so that evokes within us a response of anguish, or a response of dread. Different philosophers will call it different things, but it's this feeling of meaninglessness within us, whereby we are all of a sudden we have this sort of experiential or existential crisis of needing to find meaning, the dread of the universe, the anguish that evokes within us, and then the last point that they all have in common is that of authenticity. the search for authenticity. Now, all of them, in one degree or another, in one manifestation or another, are all of the whether it's Kierkegaard's leap of faith, whether it's Nietzsche's will to power, whether it's Heidegger's projection, whatever the case may be. All existentialist philosophies are calling on the individual to live an authentic life. That term is borrowed from Jean-Paul Sartre's version. But the existentialist philosopher is calling on the individual to live a life that is that is free from control of others to define you. So part of that is do not allow others to define you as a person. To live the authentic life means that you will define yourself. You, by your choices, by your leap of faith, by your will to power, by your projection, by your authentic living, your transcendence and your authentic living, you choose to define yourself. That's what authenticity means. Your meaning is not given to you from the outside. Your meaning is created by you through your personal choices. So that would be another sort of common factor of these existentialist philosophies. Okay, so individualism and subjectivity, freedom and responsibility, existence and essence, anguish and absurdity, authenticity, and we'll see how those play out in these various philosophers as we move along. Okay. Well, the first person that we have to look at is a gentleman by the name of Soren Kierkegaard. He's often known as the father of modern existentialism. Soren Kierkegaard was the son of some very pietistic parents who were solid, who were very conservative. Some might almost say fundamentalist Christians. But you got to understand sort of the culture of the church in Kierkegaard's day. You see, the church that he was part of and that he was raised in. The church was very much, there's a very heavy emphasis on moralism. Moralism meaning, acting the right way, doing the right things, doing good things and this sort of thing. And there was also a tremendous amount of emphasis on doctrine. In other words, believing the right things. In the church, the sort of church or movement that he was part of emphasized that if you don't take time to be a student of philosophy, or a student rather of theology and of the Bible, to the extent where you have all of your theological ducks in a row, so that all of your doctrine is highly nuanced and absolutely correct, you could very well burn in hell. Okay, you could very well not be a genuine Christian because your lack of love for God was evidenced by the fact that you weren't willing to spend the time to invest in studying Him and this sort of thing. And so, what that generated ultimately was a church culture that was sort of dry. It was very heady or cerebral, very much emphasis on a very heavy emphasis on knowledge, as opposed to sort of living out a sort of charismatic belief, and we'll see where he goes with that. It was a very dry thing, and as Kierkegaard looks around him in his day, and he sees all these people living their life as Christians in this particular way, he begins to get very upset, very sort of disgusted with the church around him. And the reason being is because he's reading his Bible, he's seeing the people there are much more joyous. People there are much more much sadder, much more emotionally involved. There's not quite the emphasis, especially as you're looking in the Gospels or the narrative parts of the Scripture. There's not as much emphasis on all of these highly tuned philosophical arguments. Even in the later writings, the epistles, there's not nearly as much emphasis on that. There's more there, but certainly when Jesus is seen preaching or teaching, he's touching people. He's telling them stories. He's very much more interested in sort of meeting people where they're at. and trying to bring them maybe one step further along the journey. We never see Jesus, breaking out the cosmological argument. We never see Jesus, talking about the ontological argument or discussing the moral problem of evil or anything like that. Jesus is much more concerned with being involved in the lives of people and in touching the lives of people. That's not to say that he didn't require a certain standard of living or certain behavioral requirements, I guess. But what it is to say is that Jesus doesn't require people to be theologians in order to come to him. And Kierkegaard sees Jesus acting that way, and in the church of his day acting a completely different way, and he gets very upset about that. He gets very upset, and so he begins to really hammer on the sort of what he perceives to be a dry approach to religion. Whereas when he looks in the Bible, all that he sees are people that are emotionally ecstatic about their new life and about their faith in Christ and in God and things like this. So anyway, Kierkegaard begins to put together an approach to Christianity that some in his day considered to be blasphemous. But we'll see exactly. We'll see whether it is or not. Okay, so for the one thing, Kierkegaard is what you call a fideist. A fideist is a person who believes that faith is more important than reason when it comes to matters of religion. A fideist believes that while you may have good reasons to believe, there are no arguments that are going to force you to believe or can force someone else to believe. That if we're going to believe, we must believe on the basis of faith, in faith alone. And so this idea is known as fideism. Not the idea of every religious person out there, but this was Kierkegaard. He believed, in fact, he taught that, in fact, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind. Kierkegaard believed that it was not useful, nor was it advantageous for a person to have to wait until he had all the data that he could have in order to make a decision to follow God, to believe in Jesus. He believed that some decisions were far too important to wait until all the requisite data comes in. And he'll say something along the lines of, if we wait until we have enough evidence to believe, or if we wait until we have enough finely tuned philosophical arguments to believe, well, what does that mean? That's going to mean that everybody's going to have to spend all of their time in study. That's going to mean that everybody has to spend all of their time as a philosopher developing these arguments and understanding these arguments, so that everybody is going to have to become a scholar in order to even believe. He says that's ridiculous, because the faith mentioned in the Bible is the faith of children, as well as the faith of the elderly, as well as the faith of the philosopher. And so it has to have sort of a way of connecting at all of those different levels, right? And certainly being a philosopher doesn't connect at all of those levels, because are we really going to wait until until we've had years of schooling, until we've had the opportunity to have access to all of these documents? Are we really going to wait for all of that to take place before we actually make an investment of faith, before we actually believe? Kierkegaard says no. Some decisions are far too important to put off until we have all the evidence. And besides, at the end of the day, we're never really going to have all of the evidence. The evidence doesn't prove God. It doesn't disprove him, but it doesn't prove him. Because somebody can always be willing to dismiss evidence. Someone can always be willing to interpret the evidence differently so as to come to a different conclusion. And so you'll never be able to argue anyone into heaven, anyone into a religious belief, Kierkegaard says. What is required and what honors God actually more is if we choose to believe even without all the evidence. In fact, if we choose to believe even when we have evidence to the contrary, then that honors God more. At least that's what Kierkegaard is arguing. He says if we choose to believe even in the face of evidence to the contrary, then that would honor God. That shows our devotion to God more significantly than if we have all the evidence. Because, I mean, let's face it, it's no jump of virtue to believe something that we have all the evidence. It's no virtue to believe that the sky is blue when I can just look up and see that it's blue. It doesn't take an investment of faith. It doesn't take trust to believe that. I can do it on the basis of my senses. And so Kierkegaard says that the more virtuous, the more virtuous investment of faith rather would be to believe even in spite of evidence to the contrary. He believes rather than rational arguments, a passionate leap of faith is what God requires and what God exemplifies more so. That would be his leap of faith. Now, in this leap of faith, the believer is supposed to be passionate about it. The believer is supposed to suspend disbelief. The believer is supposed to believe even in spite of of evidence to the contrary. That is what honors God the most. Now, in what he's saying here, what we see are elements that will echo throughout the rest of different existentialist philosophers later on. This idea of a subjective commitment to something, rather than having all the things worked out, having sort of transcendent knowledge where everything's worked out. It's a subjective commitment, and that's what Kierkegaard is most interested in here. That's Kierkegaard, and needless to say, Kierkegaard, the basis for him doing this is the fact that he has a commitment to God. He's a Christian individual who has a commitment to God, and he believes that the most important area of commitment to God is that of just an investment of faith, an investment of pure suspension of disbelief. He believes that would honor God the most. A passionate commitment to faith, he says, or reasons, is far more important than a person who believes the right things and yet is not passionate about it. I mean, does that person really believe? That's the question that he asks. He goes to the extent of saying, and if you're a religious person, you might feel the weight of this, I don't know. But he goes to the extent of saying that it would be better if a person believes something that is almost heretical and yet is passionate about believing it, and it has a passionate commitment to God. It would be better for that person than it would be for a person who has all the theological ducks in a row, has all the proper doctrine, and yet has no passion for God in their heart. For Kierkegaard, the one that is closer to a heretic would be better. He would rather live a passionate pursuit of God than a dry and dead and dusty sort of experience where, yeah, you might know a lot of things, but at the end of the day, you have no passion for God. That is not a way to live, he would say. So that's Kierkegaard, and this commitment to a faith that some would even call absurd. He says, the Christian faith is absurd. Think about some of the things you believe. Think about some of the things that you believe as a Christian. It's absurd, but that's what makes it even the more better, he would say. Is that a right word? More better? That's what makes it even better, is that we can, because of the absurdity, or even in light of the fact that the belief in this faith is absurd, that we can invest faith in it and receive that passionate, vibrant, passionate faith. Well, now, against Kierkegaard, are sort of serving as the opposite side of the coin, as it were, because existentialists aren't all Christians. In fact, very few of them are. On the other hand, what we find is a number of existentialist atheists. Now, I said that not a lot of existentialists are Christians. That may not be entirely true. Certainly, there has been a strain in the last 100 years or so called the neo-orthodox movement. Karl Barth and others of his followers in the early 20th century, early mid 20th century, are certain, take a more existentialist approach to theology. Paul Tillich, another one, and you can look some of those people up. However, it's debated within in Christian circles whether those guys what they represent actually are. Actually is rather Orthodox theology or Christian theology, what Christians have always believed. Some believe that it's a tremendous departure from that. So the argument goes on. But in any case, there certainly, while there are existentialist strains of Christian theologians, there certainly are atheistic strains of existentialists as well. And one prime example of that would be the guy by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche is a fascinating individual. Your book, I think, talks about some myths associated with him and all that. I will say, even though he's an atheist, even though I personally would disagree on a good number of points with Friedrich Nietzsche, especially about core issues, nonetheless, I find him a fascinating individual to study. He's very eloquent in his prose, in his articulation. Very powerful, knows how to state things very powerfully, and he knows how to hold your interest too, right? So there are some philosophers that are just kind of boring to listen to, or boring to read, sort of the cure for insomnia. But Nietzsche is not one of those. He is very dramatic, very animated, very, very powerful in his presentation, and an interesting guy to read his philosophy, even if you don't agree with it at the end of the day. But he's an existentialist philosopher, meaning that Nietzsche starts out, and I would say, and others have, I would say that Nietzsche probably takes an effort to consistently live out his atheism, his commitment to atheism, through his philosophy. He realizes that if atheism is true, you see, because in his day, living where he lived in Germany in his day, one was at least one was committed to some sort of strain of theology. In most cases, to be an atheist was sort of countercultural in that day. That might be a little bit alien to us now because a good many people are atheists nowadays. But in Nietzsche's day, to be an atheist and especially an outspoken one was a bit countercultural. The rest of the world, with the exception of maybe some academics, and maybe some aristocracy, the rest of the world was primarily built on a theistic, on a Christian theism, a worldview of Christian theism. But here comes, and that includes things like conception, not only conception of the universe in a cosmology, but also a Christian concept of ethics. Those things were the things that were expected, that they were enforced in many cases in the law, and appeal was often made back to the scriptures in order to justify civil law. We see that with the Blackstone commentaries and other in various parts of Europe, other codes of law. Now, enter Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche realizes there's a growing sort of tendency for some in the intelligentsia or the academic world to become atheists. And I would credit Nietzsche with being one of the earliest philosophers to take the implications of atheism seriously. And what that meant on different levels of society, especially as it relates to things like values and ethics. And what we see in Nietzsche is this effort to try to establish an approach to values and ethics based on an atheist understanding of the world. And I think he tries to be consistent with that and does, in some ways, a pretty good job of it. But anyway, that's my thesis. Let's talk a little bit about what Nietzsche talked about. Now, Nietzsche is an atheist, and so as such, he believes that the universe is a materialistic universe. It's not been caused by God at any time in history. God has no being, no supernatural being has a responsibility for bringing all things into existence and everything like that. Everything is the product of evolutionary processes, perhaps, processes that were brought about by natural selection and things like this. He believes that, he believes that as such, one of the entailments of that, and this goes in the field of axiology, is that no thing in the universe has inherent value. In other words, it doesn't have, we can't look at something and say that's inherently good or that's inherently bad. Because without a transcendent source of value, everything is just equally meaningless, right? And so, in order to find value or achieve value, one must do so for themselves. Now, when he talks about morality, though, I find it very interesting that he invokes a kind of approach to morality where he looks at traditional morality, like things like patience, things like kindness, self-control, all of these things that that a Christian theism would consider to be virtues, right? Self-sacrifice being one of them. These ideas that have been considered Christian virtues, and that even for non-Christians in the West still form sort of a cultural approach to morality, at least in Nietzsche's day. He says that those things are what he refers to as a slave morality. The slave morality. See, the idea here is for Nietzsche is that there are a few exceptional individuals in a given population. Those exceptional individuals create the energy, if you will, on which the rest of society sort of rides on the coattails. And so these men, these women, these people who form these exceptional human beings on whose coattails the rest of society run, these are the overmen, or the ubermensch, the overmen, the supermen. And traditionally, those people have been kept in check by what is known as the slave morality. Because if those people had not been kept in check, then they would rise to power and sort of trample on all of the others. Now, this has happened a few times in the world, in the history of the world. But Nietzsche believes that for the most part, this slave morality, this morality that would enslave each one of us to sort of being patient, waiting on others, serving the downtrodden, sacrificing of ourselves, this sort of slave morality has been used to keep those exceptional individuals in check and to harness their energies for the good of the population, sort of the herd mentality, if you will. What Nietzsche believes is what the individual needs to do is to overcome this slave morality, and recognize and invoke, make a concerted effort to will to power. Now that's his phrase, the will to power, and the will to power certainly is a quality or a trait that is present in all of these exceptional individuals. But everybody, at some level, Nietzsche would say, has sort of this will to power, this drive to dominate others and dominate one's scenario and control their scene. Not everybody has the ability to do that, but we have sort of a drive to do that inside. And Nietzsche believes that what we need to do is harness that will to power and make use of it sort of as a creative energy or so, and evoke that in our life. Overcome the slave mentality, the idea that where others are trying to sort of harness our energies and keep us down, and we need to will to power in order to sort of escape that, in order to find meaning within ourselves. Again, there is no objective meaning. There's no overarching meaning. There is only this individual subjective meaning, and we manifest that meaning when we will to power, when we try to overcome this slave morality and break out of this slave morality. That's Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, there have been a lot of people who equate Friedrich Nietzsche. Of course, he's a German philosopher. And yes, later on, people like the Nazis would make use of some of his philosophy. Nietzsche himself was not a Nazi. He predated the Nazis by quite a number of years. But some of his ideas were taken and sort of twisted a bit and utilized by Nazis, who would come later and take this idea of the overman, right? And the Nazis believed that one of the ways in which we can create the overman or realize the overman was through the practice of eugenics, through selective breeding, sterilization, implementing systematic destruction of or of certain populations that were considered dysgenic or not genetically fit. And so they took his concept and used it and sort of used it in their own way. But we shouldn't say that would mean that Nietzsche is necessarily a Nazi. I don't think that would be an accurate assessment of him. Let's see. So there's Kierkegaard. There's Friedrich Nietzsche. The next guy that I'd like to talk about is a guy by the name of Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is another typical existentialist. Again, we see within the philosophy of Heidegger the idea that the universe really conveys no meaning upon us as individuals. We have to sort of figure that out for ourselves. The sort of key component to Heidegger's philosophy is a concept known as Dasein. Dasein is basically a word that means existence. He uses it as a technical term, though, as sort of to explain the phenomenon that we experience when we ponder our own existence. Okay, so he refers to that as Dasein, this idea, this experience that we go through when we ponder our own existence. And there are three components to Dasein, according to Heidegger. The first component is the idea, what he calls the idea of thrownness. Okay, thrownness, thrownness, and this is the feeling or that we get when we realize that we have no choice whatsoever. That we have been thrown into this world. We have no choice whatsoever but to accept the fact that our existence in this world is sort of absurd. There's no reason for it. We've been thrown into this existence. Well, we are where we find ourselves, and what we need to do is pick up from there and go and accept the fact of our own thrownness. The second one is the idea of projection. Now, because we are thrown into our existence, we have no choice on how we're thrown into this existence. However, projection is where we take our thrownness, meet ourselves where we're at, and we decide how through our choices how we are going to sort of create ourselves in this world. That we're going to define ourselves as an existing individual. Because nothing else can define us. Nothing else gives meaning to us. The fact that we're American, for example, or we may be American, doesn't mean that defines me in who I am as an individual. That being an American is part of my thrownness. It's that aspect that I can't really control, right? But what I make of that, what I make of the fact that I'm an American, what meaning I read into that, and what choices I make as a result of that, or to feed into that, to give meaning to that. Now that's what he calls my projection, and so I'm going to project my own meaning into my existence. That's how I create meaning for myself. And then he talks about the fallenness of Dasein. The fallenness is the tendency to fall in with or be defined by a group. It's basically allowing someone else to talk about who or what we are to define us as a person, rather than allowing or projecting that definition for ourselves. He believes that is not appropriate, right? So what we need to do is we need to live according to our own projection. We need to create meaning for ourselves, create our own meaning for ourselves by the choices that we make through this process of projection. That's the task, if you will, that follows each one of us. Okay, so that's a little something about Heidegger. Now, the next person that I want to talk about he's also an atheist existentialist. The next person probably is one of the more detailed, at least widely published, widely read, widely written, produces a large volume of work. It's a guy by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre has sort of a leg up on everybody because he writes not only philosophical treatises, But Sartre also takes a good amount of time in trying to embody his philosophy in a more entertaining form of literature, through short stories, through plays, and things like this. And so Jean-Paul Sartre tries to illustrate his philosophy through an entertainment media, which is probably why he's more widely read than some of the other ones. So this is a heads up to you aspiring philosophers out there, right? That if you want to be well known and well read, don't just write down your philosophy, encode your philosophy in popular media, and then it'll be more widely distributed, right? So make a Disney movie out of it or something. I don't know. But this is what Sartre does. He engages us not only on the intellectual plane, but also on the affective or the entertainment level as well. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit of something about Sartre. Okay. Sartre believes, first of all, that you are radically free to choose whatever you want in any given situation. In fact, he was while he was the town that he lived in for a while was occupied by the Nazis, and he was asked later on about his experience there being under occupation. Sartre made the exclamation that we were never more free than we were when we were under Nazi occupation. Now, that seems absurd, right? What was he on the side of the Nazis? Well, no, he wasn't. He was no Nazi. He was very much against them and what they stood for. And yet, we were never more free than when under Nazi occupation. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, he believes, first of all, that we are radically free. Our choices have significance no matter what, and we can never, ever say that we were forced into something against our will. But what does that translate to with the Nazis? Well, what this meant was that when you had a Nazi gun pointed at your head telling you to do something, if you allowed that Nazi to make your choice for you through threat of violence, then you are living inauthentically. But under Nazi occupation, you had the opportunity, unlike any other time in your life, to express your ability to freely choose when you had a gun pointed at your head and you still chose to do whatever it is that you wanted to do. Now that takes a realization that you are absolutely free. We can see that, can't we? Think about if we were at an ATM and we're getting our money out of our account and all of a sudden somebody comes up and points a weapon at our head and says, look, hey, give me all your money or I'm going to shoot you. Well, if we gave him all the money, Sartre would say, don't say that you didn't choose to do that. You could have easily chosen not to do that. You could have chosen to keep your money. You could have chosen to tell him to take a hike. You might have got shot for it, but you still could have chosen to do it. You were absolutely free in that moment. You may have had to suffer the consequences of your choice, but nonetheless, don't say that you weren't free. You were absolutely 100% free. And that's what Sartre was getting at. Under the Nazis, we had the ability to demonstrate our freedom by disobeying people who were literally threatening to kill us. Normally, we could hide our conformity, but when we were with the Nazis, our conformity could not be hidden. If we were conforming, it was obvious. If we were freely choosing, that was obvious. And so we were never more free. We had the ability to express our freedom, unlike any other time in history, he says. So Sartre believed that we are absolutely free no matter what. No one can force you to do something against your will. You always have a choice. That choice might come with consequences, but you always have a choice. He believes that we are radically free. Another thing that Sartre says, and this is related to, and we'll see how these things tie together in a minute, but another thing that Sartre says is that existence precedes essence. Now, we've already talked about that briefly for a minute. Let me remind you about what that means. Existence precedes essence. Normally, we would think of things, there being such thing as, let's say, a human nature. And when we see a child, we can tell that it's a human because it has human nature. Unlike if we saw a baby human, a baby dog, a baby cat, a baby elephant, we saw those babies in a row, we could tell which one was a human by virtue of the fact that it has a human nature. And that's how we typically tend to think of humans, right? Humans possess an essence, a nature of what it means to be a human. And that is in that essence of what it means to be a human was here before I ever existed. That's the normal way that we tend to think about things, right? That we as humans have a binding essence even before we're born, so that when a being is born, if it matches that essence of humanity, it is a human. Okay? So the essence precedes existence. That's typically the normal sort of conventional wisdom. Well, Sartre takes that conventional wisdom and turns it up on its head. And he says, no, that's not the conventional wisdom in this case is not how things actually are. Essence does not precede existence, as if we can be defined by anything other than ourselves. There is no meaning to what it means to be a human before you choose to make your choices and create yourself through those choices. So according to Sartre, we have to be born and exist as a physical organism before we can make choices that ultimately determine our essence. You see, for Sartre, our essence is not embodied by the fact that we look like a human, we have the DNA of a human, we have the features of a human. That doesn't define us, that doesn't create our essence. For Sartre, essence is what we choose to be, and the meaning that we choose to give to ourselves. That's what he means by essence when he says essence. And so our existence as a physical entity has to precede our ability to choose and create ourselves by our choices. That is Sartre's idea of existence precedes essence. In other words, you're nothing until you create yourself through your choices. That's his meaning. That's what he means by existence precedes essence. That we create ourselves through our choices, and that's when we have a defined meaning as a human being. We have an essence. That sounds very ennobling and empowering, and I understand that. It does. I mean, let's face it. Isn't that the kind of thing that you hear at a motivational speech? That it doesn't matter. You've seen maybe in the past where people who have begun life in extremely difficult circumstances. Maybe they were born with a tremendous birth defect that has held them back, or maybe they went through some terrible experiences as a child, or grew up under a terrible regime, or any number of things. We've all seen stories of those people who have overcome the odds, and in a sort of motivational way, they are encouraging each one of us to create ourselves. Don't allow our circumstances to define us. And certainly that's an ennobling message. That's an empowering message. But I want you to understand something of what Sartre's philosophy entails, though. While on the one hand it is very ennobling and it is very empowering, understand another implication of it. What it also implies is that we don't have, as individuals, we don't have meaning aside from the choices that we make for ourselves. We don't have meaning aside from the choices that we make for ourselves, which means that there's no inherent meaning or inherent worth to being human. Now let that sink in for a second. If our only meaning, if our essence is determined as we create ourselves through our choices, that means as a human being, just by virtue of the fact that we're human, our life doesn't have meaning inherently. It doesn't have meaning until that meaning is determined by us through the choices that we make. So, okay, well, what does that mean about a newborn baby? Well, that newborn baby can't make choices to define itself, not yet, not at least for a couple of years. So what that means is that newborn baby doesn't have any inherent value in and of itself. I mean, maybe it has value in relationship to the desire of its parents to love it and to keep it and to nourish it and cherish it and all this sort of thing. Okay, so maybe it has value there, but inherently, Sartre's philosophy would entail that child has no meaning. Similarly, one could argue that someone who has lived their life and not really ever done anything with their life, and now they come to the end of their life and they're ready to, and they're enduring some health difficulties, One might be able to say that that person's life has no meaning. I mean, look, they didn't do anything with their life. They didn't choose to make anything of themselves. They just kind of puttered through their days. They have no inherent meaning, no inherent value. It presents a sliding scale of value for human beings, that those who create themselves through their choices, they're worth more than those who just decide to, sort of do whatever they want to do or just putter through the existence. They're not worth nearly as much. It creates an inequality of worth when it comes to human beings. For some people, that's no problem. But remember, though, that's an implication that Sartre's philosophy would have to answer. Maybe that's not a problem for you, and that's fine. But it is one sort of negative connotation, or one that has been perceived as negative, if you will, connotation, that people don't have inherent value. They only have value in as much as they choose to make choices and define themselves. But existence precedes essence, and that's what that means. Now, Sartre realizes and he recognizes the fact that each one of us is born into the world with a certain amount of conditions over which we have no control. Okay. Such as for example, my ethnicity. I have no control over my ethnicity. I have no control over my race. I have no control over the first language that I learn. I have no control over the biological gender or sex that I'm born. I have no control over a good number of things, right? Those things that I'm born into, that I have no control over. I have no control over, how tall I'm going to be. I have no control over my IQ. I have really no control over what country I'm born into, or what socioeconomic status I'm born into. I have no control over any of those things. And Sartre recognizes that there are those realities in the world over which we have no control, and yet those things exercise an influence on our day-to-day choices. Right? He calls those things facticity. And he believes that facticity, while we have no control over those things, nevertheless, what we can control is the amount of significance that we give to those things in making our choices. Let me explain. I have no control over the fact that, for example, I have no control over the fact that I'm a male, for example, or I'm a white male born in the United States. I have no control over those things, but those things might play an influence on my day-to-day decisions. What Sartre believes is that I need to recognize my facticity. I need to recognize how I am in this world, where I'm at in this world. All of these things that sort of collude to influence my choices. And while I can't control those, what I can do is choose to allow the amount of significance I assign to each one of them as they relate to my choosing how to live in this world. So, for example, in last century, or maybe in the 1900s, a woman who was born into the world in the United States at that time didn't have a lot of the same freedoms that women have nowadays, or the same opportunities. But Sartre would look at that woman and say to her, don't allow the fact that you were born a woman to hold you down or to hold you back. What you need to do is choose what amount of significance you give to the fact that you were born a woman, and make your choices to overcome that, if that's what you so choose to do. Don't allow that to be the determining factor. So you want to get a college education, but you're a woman. You say, I can't. Do it anyway. Don't allow the fact that you're a woman to stop you from getting that college education, even if you live in the 1900s, in the 1930s, 1940s. Go ahead, go to college and overcome the facticity of the fact that you were born a woman. Don't let that be a significant factor in you determining whether or not you pursue that ambition or that choice of yours. Okay? You don't have a choice over what you are, but you do have a choice on how you allow that to impact and influence your decisions. The amount of significance that you place on that, says Sartre. So overcome that. Now, what Sartre talks, what he calls that, this overcoming our facticity, this rising above our facticity, he calls that transcendence. In Kant, I keep saying Kant, Sartre believes that what we need to do is transcend our facticity and live authentically. Living authentically is where we create ourselves through our choices. That's what he calls authentic living, not allowing others to sort of influence you, not allowing naysayers to convince you otherwise, not allowing the realities of the world in which we live to drag you down and hold you captive, but transcending your facticity in order to live authentically, live according to what you have chosen, and create yourself through your choices. That's what Jean-Paul Sartre says to do. Now, he calls this transcendence, transcending your facticity and living authentically. Because if you don't transcend your facticity and you allow others to determine your course for you, you allow others to inordinately influence your choices. Kant calls that living by bad faith. To live in such a way that you allow others to choose your destiny for you. That is living according to bad faith, and he believes that is an inauthentic way of living. That is not you. You're not creating yourself. You're allowing yourself to be created by others, right? So the authentic living is creating yourself through your own choices. Now, there's one other problem that we need to mention here. In addition to the idea that human beings would have no inherent value, there's one other difficulty that some have recognized with Sartre's philosophy at this point, and it carries over to a number of other existentialists as well. You see, because if there's no inherent meaning in anything, remember, axiology is the study of value, the study of meaning. If there's no inherent value in anything, and the world truly is absurd, as the existentialist often claims, then we run into the problem of determining what choices should we choose. What choices should we choose? Now, let me give you an example. Jean-Paul Sartre says living authentically is living according to your own choices. But the moment you say that there is a value on a certain choice as opposed to another choice, is that not a brand of facticity? Is not a moral code a way of sort of smuggling in to try to influence you to do something according to this moral code? Isn't that a facticity? Is it moral impulse a facticity? Something that you have that maybe you had very little control in, and now it's determining your decisions for you. Now, here's the thing. I think here's an illustration. This is borrowed from Francis Schaeffer when he was discussing Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't remember what work it was, but that's who it was. Actually, I think he did it in a couple of different works that he wrote. But Schaeffer says this. He says, imagine Jean-Paul Sartre coming to the crossroads of a street, an intersection. And he comes to the crossroad, and there's a little old lady standing there waiting to cross the street. And it's a busy, heavy traffic, right? Now, Sartre would have a decision to make at this point. He has a choice to make in what to do with this lady in the situation that he finds himself, right? And he has a few choices to make. So either he can help the little old lady across the street, and that would be a choice. Or he can just go across the street and totally ignore her and just sort of go his own way and let her make her own way across the street. That's another thing that he might do. Or the third thing that he could do is he could push the little old lady into traffic, and so that she gets run over. Now, if we have a moral code, a moral impulse in our body, we can almost see and we could almost guess or even speculate on, okay, which one of those is the right thing to do versus which is the wrong thing to do. We might say something like, well, the best thing to do in all of those three options is to help her across the street. Less than best, right? So the middle one is just to ignore the lady altogether. That's sort of a neutrality. It's kind of a jerk move, but it's not totally evil yet, right? And so we could choose to do that. But if we throw the little old lady into traffic so she gets run over by a bus, now that would be totally evil and depraved. And so we've sort of imposed a moral code, and so we are cheering for Sartre to help the little old lady across the street because that would be the right thing to do. But as soon as Sartre lets his choice be defined by the right thing to do, he is living the inauthentic life, and he is operating by bad faith. So there's really no guiding moral principle that would inherently within the existentialist framework itself. There's no guiding moral principle that say that one choice would be better than others. And now Sartre tried to get around this one way or another, but what he always seemed to do was smuggle in moral codes, moral justifications from other systems, such as Immanuel Kant's system, do that which is universally applicable and this sort of thing. He kind of smuggles elements from other systems in, but ultimately those systems are not required by his existentialism. In existentialism, if there is no moral value, no overarching, objective, universal moral value, there's no way to say which choice is better. And if you do have an overarching moral value that demands that one choice is better than the other, then if you choose according to that, you're living inauthentically. And so it would seem that Sartre's scheme, while it might at first blush seem to be very ennobling, very charismatic, at the end of the day, it leaves us in a quandary as to what really constitutes a good choice. And if I've created myself to be something, is that good or is that bad? Well, if we're consistent with the theory of existentialism, we may never know. Because there's no inherent meaning, no inherent value to anything. The universe is absurd. And you can create meaning for yourself. But what's to say that one meaning is better or more important or to be preferred over another one? So that's existentialism. And I would guess, if I had to guess, I would probably venture to wager that existentialism is probably the reigning moral philosophy of today. That existentialism is probably the reigning approach to finding meaning, because if you ask people, even people who traditionally, from views that have traditionally affirmed the existence of a universal objective morality, such as religious worldviews, people today would almost universally affirm individuality, subjectivity as a source of meaning. All of these things are elements of existentialism. And yet, I don't know that many people have examined that worldview for its own weaknesses and been willing to embrace that worldview consistently. That might be more difficult to do than we at first imagined. But in any case, that's existentialism. And I look forward to seeing everybody when I get back. And we will discuss this briefly, but the quiz will be up. Don't forget to do the quiz. Also, don't forget to that there's a forum up there, a discussion forum that I've put. You may choose to ignore that discussion forum if you'd like to. You may choose to go on there and interact with other students. I'll be monitoring it over the course of the next week, so as to see if there's any question there that I might be able to clarify. And I'll be happy to do that on the forum. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of sleeping in. I hope to see you all back next time. Have a great one. Bye-bye.